I'm Michael Wargo, team pilot with Precision Aerobatics. Today we're going to do something a little different, something I really haven't covered. And today I'm going to go over a definition of 3D flying. Like, what is 3D flying? You know, the types of planes used and the maneuvers. I talk all the time about transitioning into 3D from basic aerobatics. But today I'm going to fly a little bit and explain what really defines 3D flying so you can understand what it is, and then the beginning intervals and things that you do to start to learn 3D. So this is a 3D aircraft. As you will notice, the flight controls are very large. If you look how much elevator we have a ton of elevator. Same thing with the ailerons and rudder. Huge flight controls. These flight controls are not necessarily used when you're flying fast. These flight controls are generally just deflecting a little bit when you're flying normally. These are specifically designed for post-stall. What really defines 3D is when the plane is no longer flying with the wings holding it up and it's stalled. That means without the power of the motor kind of pulling on it and holding it up to hover or Harrier, the plane won't fly. It will fall out of the sky. So this is a 3D plane. Now I'm going to show you a typical aircraft like this. This is a little scale plane we're going to test fly today from Hobby King. But as you can see, the flight controls are much smaller. Very little elevator, very little rudder comparatively. And this is basically made for speed, to turn and burn and have a little fun with. But this will not 3D. If I tried to stall the aircraft, there's just not enough airflow over the controls to be able to do any of the maneuvers that I can do with this one. Also, typically a 3D plane is way easier to fly, way easier to land, because the wing loading makes the plane very light. In other words, you don't have to carry a lot of speed into landing or anything like that, because it tends to want to float. You can see the size of the wing area here. The plane is very light, and it's also much more controllable. So in my opinion, it's much easier to fly. So let's go out to the flight line and let's put it through some of the maneuvers, and I'll explain them to you as I go. Okay, you know, a few things about 3D planes and in general is, again, they'll lift off a lot quicker, they'll lift off slower, and so on and so forth. Like I said, they really are a lot easier to fly. And you can see how nice and slow it will fly. This thing is barely moving, and if I turn this thing into the wind, you will see that the plane literally is almost stopped. The little plane I showed you, I mean, would have to be flying 20 miles an hour to be able to stay aloft. Now, what defines 3D is, like I said, it is post-stall. Right now, this plane is hanging on the propeller quite a bit. It's very windy, so the plane is holding on the propeller, and you can see it's almost stopped. People associate hovering with 3D flying, and of course right now it's hanging 100% on the propeller. 3D flying is generally, it's not just that it's hanging on the prop, it's all those really, you know, tight maneuvers, things like this. That's considered 3D. Okay, this is a Harrier. This is the quintessential 3D maneuver, and this is the first thing you really want to learn if you're going to learn the 3D. And if you go to any of my other videos, you can learn how to Harrier and hover and things like that. I'm not going to make this an instructional video. But again, this is 3D flying right now. It's still flying forward. There's a lot of maneuvers that we can do that would obviously be 3D. We're going to, for instance, even knife edge. Like, there's this type of knife edge where I'm really clearly flying forward and flying knife edge, and I can do that with jets, and it's not 3D. But a high alpha knife edge, like this one, is 3D flying. You can see how slow it's traveling, and it's really hanging on the prop quite a bit. So that's just a knife edge. Anything that is flown slowly, like rolling Harriers and things like that, you can see these are all 3D maneuvers. A rolling Harrier is a very typical 3D maneuver that's quite difficult to do, but it's something that most people associate with 3D. And of course, this plane is doing a lot of hanging on the propeller. There are maneuvers like an inverted Harrier, and you can see it's doing more hanging on the propeller than it is, you know, flying. This is obviously a combination of wings and propeller. And anything we do in this configuration is 3D. See, this is a snap roll back to inverted Harrier. People always associated hovering with 3D flying, and that is where the plane is completely hanging on the propeller. The biggest thing to learn how to 3D and start this is to learn how to Harrier. And this is a Harrier. And from there, all things become possible. The confusing part for anybody who's used to flying warbirds is they're very used to the plane flying, which is like this, and transitioning to the plane not having much forward speed. It just kind of feels like the plane's going to tip stall, which is very common because they've tip stalled warbirds on landings and things like that. Even pilots that have been flying for 20, 30 years have a real hard time with the concept of just letting the plane slow down. But the biggest part of it is having the right aircraft. And obviously this is the right aircraft. This is a perfect 3D aircraft. Flies all these maneuvers easy or easier than just about any I've ever flown. This is a Precision Aerobatics Addiction X. Now you can see how fast we can turn on the rudder, and that's all because the plane itself is designed to fly this slow. If the rudder wasn't so large, the deflections weren't so much, it would not be able to do any of this stuff. And of course, with a 3D aircraft, you know, even landings can be a lot different than you would ever consider landing with a regular aircraft. Because I can slow this down to almost 0.